of Agriculture, Food, and Agri-business. Thank you, Cassie, for recording. I do have Cassie Russell here with me today. She's OMAFA's Nursery and Landscape Specialist. So she's here today just in case any nursery questions come up to handle. Thanks, Cassie. So I'd like to take this time to plug our GrowON educational series. So this is a series run by the greenhouse team here at OMAFA, and we do host webinars like we're doing today. We also do in-person events like Lunch and Learns. So just keep your eyes peeled for advertisements for those events on our blogs. So that's the On Floriculture blog, the On Greenhouse Vegetable blog, and then we also love to get our nursery folks involved when we can. So you can head over to the On Nursery Crops blog to find advertisements there as well. So in this series, we cover production topics like we are today, and we also cover integrated pest management or IPM topics as well. So keep your eyes peeled for those events and attend whenever you'd like. And just some housekeeping for this event today. So this webinar is being recorded, and we'll post the recording in the near future on the On Floriculture blog. So if you missed something today from the presentation, don't fret. You can go back and look at the recording later. We also really encourage questions for today, so you can use the Q&A function here on Zoom to ask questions. Ryan has let me know that he has put some question periods within his presentation, so just drop a question in the Q&A function whenever you'd like, and Ryan will get to those throughout his presentation and then at the end as well. I think that's all for housekeeping. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker today, Ryan Munroe. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Ryan. So Ryan has his Master's of Forest Conservation from the University of Toronto. He was a senior research technician at the Vineland Research and Innovation Centre here in Vineland, Ontario. And he's currently the horticulture advisor and plant health team lead for NVK Nurseries in North Dundas, Ontario. So he has quite the diverse background in applied research. I'm personally very excited to learn something this afternoon from Ryan. We're really looking forward to the presentation. So I'll just go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Kathryn. I'm here and ready to share.
Alrighty, you can go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. Is that all good? You guys can see that?
It's just loading. There we go. I can see it now.
Okay, I'll take it from here, I guess.
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. And Cassie's here with us too, which is great. So yeah, I'll be talking today about container growing. And because I got such a great introduction, I'll leave introducing myself. I'll leave that part to Kathryn because she's already completed. I'll focus a little bit on giving you guys the motivation behind this talk, a little bit about NVK Nurseries, and one thing I like to do at the start of presentations is make a promise to kind of hold myself accountable and to maybe pique your interest in taking something tangible away from this talk. So what motivated me? I love helping growers. I am a grower in a certain kind of way. I'm more of an advisor at NVK Nurseries. I do grow my own cut flowers on the side as well. And I love growing trees. That's my real passion. But yeah, my promise to you guys is that you're going to take at least two things away that you can implement this growing season. Things that maybe you have heard of, maybe you've thought of trying, and maybe you see that we've tried it. Or things that maybe you haven't heard of that I'm going to outline that are important considerations for growing in containers. So that's my promise to you guys. And yeah, I'll just get started and give you a little bit of background on NVK before I really get into the meat of the presentation. For those of you who don't know us, we're a wholesale nursery, fourth generation family run. Yeah, north of Dundas, we operate on over 1,200 acres. Really fortunate to have all kinds of great fields for field growing. But we do a mix of field growing and container growing, and a huge variety of plants that we grow. We do broker in some plants here and there, to be able to fulfill the orders for our customers, but we are primarily a growing nursery. And we're not just a finishing nursery either. We also do a lot of our own propagation, which you'll see, which is very cool. So the job's never boring. So much going on at the nursery. We always love touring people around and showing them what we're up to. But yeah, although diversity is definitely seen as our strength and being able to provide so much to our customers, it's also our greatest challenge being able to grow such a wide range of plant material in both containers and in the field. Something that's unique, something that's been set up to help support the nursery that I'm very grateful for because I lead the team and I have a job because of it at MVK. The fact that we have a dedicated plant health team that's comprised of three of us is kind of unique across nurseries, at least in Ontario. I know there's some that have small teams in other parts of North America and maybe in Europe, but I think it's wonderful that we are able to not be focused on production, but rather help our growers and help people involved in production do things more effectively, more efficiently. We have the time to do kind of be in-house extension scientists, extension agents. So we have an IPM specialist, Lauren, on the left-hand side, coming from an entomology background. She's done 2 seasons with us. Came in with a really strong entomology background, like I said, but also has been picking up and learning a lot about plant diseases and being able to help us take preventative action. And then we've got Nolan on the right there, he also runs our green roof department and also does grow some of our container tree liners, but he's kind of half-time with the plant health team, being our weed and water management specialist, helping us be more efficient and effective with both watering and our weed. So they'll come up a couple of times in the presentation. And then what do I do? I almost skipped over. So I lead the team, but really I try to keep my focus on our top priorities. A few years ago when I started, we came up with the phrase low-hanging fruit. Like what can we make the most impact on? How can we improve plant health, improve how the nursery runs most quickly with kind of the easiest fixes. I think after three full seasons, we've tackled a lot of those areas. But where I focus my effort now is having a really comprehensive tracking program, all the shrink, all the losses that we experience across every department at the nursery. I'm tracking all of that and working with the growers to understand why we're experiencing mortality of certain crops, and then ideally solving that problem really quickly. And then also conducting like a thorough photo monitoring program throughout the nursery, walking every crop across hundreds of acres twice a season, just so that we have eyes on it. We're tracking the health. We're picking up patterns. I think that will pay dividends in years to come. We have that information all in-house and stored and organized. And then I do a little bit of research and development here and there. And I'll keep moving. I quickly go through kind of the complexity of the nursery and why it's important for us to really have ourselves organized. Like I said, we do field production. That includes bare root trees and many hundreds of acres of bulb and burlap trees and evergreens. But then we have container departments for perennials, shrubs, evergreens, small trees, and large trees. Each of these departments has their own head grower, department head. We also have a green roof department, like I think I mentioned that Nolan runs that. And we also have 2 propagation greenhouses that feed a lot of these departments with small liners, small plugs. Bare root trees then feeds to a good degree our large tree container production as well as our B&B tree production. And then, of course, we have suppliers across North America and some in Europe that help us. Like some of them are specialist growers. Some of them are just high volume growers that we can't quite compete. We do, because we grow such a variety, it's really important to us that we have some of these long-term suppliers that we have good relationships with. And then just a little bit of insight into some of our main production within our main propagation greenhouse for shrubs and evergreens. A lot of these are propagated by cuttings, and then some are propagated by seeding as well. Most of them start in 72 or 50 count trays, but usually 72 count trays. We use these GrowON that are fully biodegradable, kind of woven material that's broken down by fungus. But they last long enough to be able to allow really nice transplant um, without any shock because you're pulling out the whole plug. Even if it's lightly rooted, you can pull it out and transplant it just fine. Um, Typically, most of those liners get bumped into a 15 count, spend some more time in the greenhouse until they're ready, sized up enough to be potted into 1, 2, or 3 gallons. Usually it's 2 or 3 gallon pots. So that gives you a sense of some of our major in-house production and the kinds of, I mean, you're not seeing photos of those plugs, but I think we're pretty happy with the quality. Most of the time we can keep control over that. Um, and then what motivates me and what I like thinking big picture. I like to know why I'm doing something, and I know my boss Mark, the president of MVK, is also big into thinking in the future, thinking what big picture, what's the motivation behind what we're doing. If our workers understand why we're doing something, it does help motivate to do that task well. Um, so for me, the big picture is helping our growers finish their plants as smoothly, quickly as possible while maintaining like really good health of the plants. If we can do that, our customers are happy. The business does well, allows us to invest in better, say, better irrigation systems or whatever we decide we need to invest in the future. So I like that big picture thinking. I also like the satisfaction that comes from seeing our plants in the landscape. So I'm particularly coming from a background of loving trees. I like propagating trees. I like pruning trees. I like everything about trees. I especially enjoy them in the landscape. So that's kind of my big picture motivation, trying to produce really good quality trees and plants. But all of that comes down to executing the details. So I think the rest of the presentation will be about what are those details in container growing that we need to execute really well so that we can keep doing this, having this beautiful profession where we get to grow plants. We get to make a living doing what we love doing. And I would shout out to most, if not all of the employees at MVK are plant lovers. They enjoy working with plants. They enjoy working at the nursery. And so let's keep this thing rolling. So that's kind of what motivates us. Um, Number one, before we even talk about growing potted plants on our container farms, I tried to think of this kind of chronologically. What are the things we need to consider even well in advance of potting and growing a container plant? And the first thing I thought of is liner quality. And I already kind of alluded to that. We have quite a bit of capacity in-house to produce our own liners and to control the quality of those liners. And then, we have a lot of partnerships with other nurseries that give us liners. But without a good quality liner, you can run into some problems. So I'll have examples throughout the presentation. Um, and this is kind of one of the first ones of one of our, yeah. I mean, if it helps you guys learn, definitely helps us learn. This is an example of pretty much a crop failure due to poor quality liners. This is I think this is an Aesculus glabra, an Ohio buckeye tree seedling. We tried sourcing from a new supplier this past season. And even though we were skeptical about the quality of the liners, and as you can see, that root is kind of bent and also doesn't seem to have many evidence of fine roots being on it in the past. Maybe they died off, but not a high quality liner. Some of our growers noticed that these particular liners didn't have a lot of weight to them, have a lot of stored energy or juice, as they call it, in them. So, but we did need these particular species. We couldn't get them from other suppliers. So we did try potting them, but the result of that is even though we got credited on those liners because they didn't survive, we still sunk that cost of the potting mix, the fertilizer, and the labor that went into potting all of them. So that's unfortunate. And in most cases, we will just reject poor quality liners and knowing that it's not going to work out well. So here's really what you're trying to avoid. What we're trying to avoid, every nursery is trying to avoid. Not only do you have a lot of death, but you have plants that are very inconsistent in their growth. They're not going to finish at the same time. they're not going to finish quickly and they're not healthy. So we're trying to uh, live by the garbage in, garbage out motto. I really like this saying because, and I've checked with other growers, asking them. Some of our growers have been in their positions or within the nursery for decades, and I've asked them, "Have you ever seen really poor quality liners end up making a good crop?" And the response I've gotten from some of them is that no, like never. So if you're going to start with poor quality, even if you do end up getting a crop out of it, it's not going to finish as quickly. It's going to be inconsistent, and it's not going to give you a good crop most of the time. Okay, on to the next thing I thought of as a major consideration um, is growing media. So I'll talk about a few of the properties you need to look at as being really important to consider before you purchase or if you're trying to make your own growing media. Um, so my analogy would be if we were going to buy a new farm and we're growing plants in the field, we'd want to test that soil. We'd want to we'd want to determine how the drainage is. We'd want to test for the texture, the pH, the organic matter. We want to know if there's contamination, that kind of stuff. So it's equally important to know what we're going to be growing our plants in. If it's a, it's a kind of an engineered artificial substrate we make growing media, whether it's bark based or peat based or wood fiber. It's just a temporary home for the roots for the plant. But during that temporary growing stage, the conditions need to be really at least close to ideal. So at potting, I like pH to start somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5. The asterisks being that, some it depends where you're growing and what your water source is. If you're not in Southern Ontario with limestone soils and high calcium carbonate alkalinity in your irrigation water, then maybe you'd want to start a little bit higher. You'd be fine starting at a 7 or maybe even a little bit higher. But for us, at our nursery and in a lot of other nurseries in Southern Ontario, we're going to be basically liming the soil every time we irrigate. So we'd like to start on the low end for nutrient availability. I mean, we all know nutrient availability is generally ideal between 5.5 and 6.5 for most plants. So that's where we'd like to start. During production, 5.5 to 7. Even if it goes above 7, we are kind of generalist growers. A lot of us that grow ornamentals, especially shrubs and trees. I mean, and perennials. A lot of what we grow can handle pH well above 7. Um, Micronutrient deficiencies start occurring after for especially for certain species. So knowing that information is really important. But I've tracked pH in our soils and seen over the course of last season, pH rose between zero point 0.5 and 1 unit over a growing season. So we know that occurs. One thing I would highlight is the importance of making sure the pH, and the reason why the pH should really be in that range is low pH can be really um, devastating for your crops if it stays low. So this is a soil pH pen that we use from Blue Lab, and it works quite well. We've compared it with other slightly higher end probes, and basically the pH readings are quite accurate, just taking it out in the field and sticking it into to soils, field soil or potting mix. And that's reading 3.4, so we knew we needed to raise that. So we irrigated with our pond water 3 or 4 times, and we were able to bring that pH up above 5, which meant the crop ended up doing okay. But if you don't address really low pH, um, then you can have really bad results just because, especially macronutrients are tied up with low pH. I wasn't overly concerned or aware of all this until more recently, but if you have your macronutrients being tied up, that's a really big problem. We're used to seeing high pH, I think, in trees and in shrubs and blueberries. Um, and we see often iron chlorosis or manganese chlorosis, which can be severe and can kill plants. But low pH ties up macronutrients and other secondary nutrients and can be really devastating. And what you see here is those nutrients are mobile in the plant, and they're trying to salvage the new growth by sending those nutrients to the new growth. and giving up on the old growth, but I think we can all agree it's not really a saleable plant. Um, the other chemical property that everyone hears about and is aware of, I hope, is electrical conductivity, just a proxy for nutrient content in your mix. You can do it for soil as well. I mean, because most of our nutrients are salts, that's just dissolved salt elevates electrical conductivity. So that's why we use that. And that potting, you really like that to be below 1. It's microsiemens per centimeter is the measurement. During production, depending on your fertility method, you can, and depending on the crop size and type, these are kind of roughly ranges. I consulted with Nolan, um, plant health team Nolan, and these are the kind of the ranges he gave me with asterisks beside both of them, recognizing that um, these are ranges for EC based on um, doing a pour through test. Doing a pour through, I recommend a pour through test for every nursery. Training someone or a couple people to be able to do that test, and then measure the pH and EC with this kind of probe. We use this Hannah probe. And then CRF, those ranges for CRF are lower because um, the nutrients are being released based on temperature and moisture. So they're being released a little more gradually. So we don't tend to see those high levels because the plants are making use of those nutrients as they're being released. So you really start to get concerned if you're seeing much above 1.5 or 2 for EC on control release fertilized plants. Quick note, I tried out this Hannah handheld probe to go alongside my handheld pH pen, just to make quick measurements in the field to see if it was useful. It gives you different values, so I still need to calibrate it based on and compare it to like a pour through EC reading, but it's definitely reading lower than a pour through test would, but it can be useful once I kind of calibrate it. It can give me an indication of whether there's a problem or not. A couple more slides, and then I'll have a quick question break. So if anyone has any questions about these topics, I'd be happy to answer them at the short question break. Um, so physical properties, I think, have been neglected in terms of their importance in growing media. And not necessarily by scientists. I mean, there's been some really good work done in the last 10, 20 years on which physical properties uh, you need to be aware of. But I think as growers, we need to be a little bit more focused on making sure we're hitting these marks, whether we're making our own growing media or whether we're purchasing. So Vineland, where I used to work, has a good lab for testing these parameters. So we send off samples quite a bit to them. So they'll test for dry bulk density, which is mainly just, you want to be kind of within that range of 0.19 to 0.7. If you're too light, you're going to have blowover issues. If you're too heavy, you're going to compromise porosity most likely. Porosity is just the amount of void space as a percentage of volume within your growing media. So being between 50 and 85%, I mean, it really tells you how porous growing media needs to be an effective uh, substrate when you're growing in a container. Air-filled capacity is a big one. I should have highlighted this with some animation or something. This is something I wasn't really too aware of until recently, and it is really important because having that 10 to 30% air-filled capacity means after you've fully saturated a pot and you've let the water drain away due to gravity, and then whatever um, airspace is left, sorry, whatever space is left within your growing media that isn't filled by water, you want at least 10% of that to be air, and ideally between 10 and 30. If you have a really porous mix, like a coarse pine bark mix that most growers in the southeast of the United States use, they're often between 30 and 40% air-filled capacity. So they're wasteful with their water and they kind of know it, but they also have a really nice growing substrate that's never sitting too wet. We target having somewhere between 10 and 20% air-filled capacity if we can, but definitely no lower than 10. And then they just go over the pH and EC again, which I already talked about. And then container maximum water holding capacity. They're recommending between 45 and 65% water holding capacity at saturation. And so Vineland took these ranges from some really good work that's been done at North Carolina. I think it's North Carolina State University. They have some of the leading scientists in this area, and we target that 65% for our growing media because we want to be you know, wise with our water use. We don't see why we can't get best of both worlds. If we can get a growing media that has 65% water holding and a good amount of air-filled capacity, then I think we're winning on both ends. A couple other considerations. Temperature, I like our growing media to be stable, not still be really biologically active in creating high temperatures. We have potted into media that has high temperatures, and I don't know that we've seen terribly negative effects because a lot of that heat is dissipated when you pot and you're taking that big mass, a big pile, and separating it out, and you're not holding that heat in. But I in an ideal world, it should be quite stable. And then wettability is something that we hadn't really considered strongly enough until recently, especially if you've got a lot of peat and or bark in your mix. Um, if you let your mix dry down too much, say you've got, like us, you stockpile your mix and then you use it when you need it. Just be aware that if you allow it to get too dry, and you can kind of just feel it and feel if it doesn't have a lot of moisture, then you are at risk of not being able to re-wet it very well once you pot into it, which can be a severe problem. If it's very dry and you do a whole bunch of potting, and then you're trying to irrigate your pots and they won't take in the water, then you've got a real problem. So mixing the pile, watering it if you need to, if it's hanging around a long time, is both those things are recommended. And then I think this is my last slide before a little question period. Um, the last thing you can do, which we've done, we did this right when I first started at NVK because I came from Vineland, so I knew we had the capacity to get Vineland to do this test, and I thought it would be interesting. So what they do is they can give you soil moisture release curves for your growing media that tells you exactly where the permanent wilting point is for any plant growing in, sorry, not any plant. Permanent wilting point's based on the sunflower's wilting, but it will give you a permanent wilting point for a sunflower for any growing media. So if you've got well-established trees or shrubs, they might be fine a little bit below that, but it's really good to know that value. They'll give you the easily available water content at which volumetric water content your plants can really easily take in that water. And then they'll give you like kind of your water holding capacity on the high end. So what's useful with this is you have to pair it with a volumetric water content probe of some sort. And we already had a couple growers using those probes that I got a photo of there. Again, it's a Blue Lab volumetric water content probe. So then you can use that information. If you're always growing in the same mix and it's pretty consistent, you can use these ranges to really dial in your watering. So you can make sure it's within those good ranges. You can let it dry down a bit, but not too much. And then, making sure it's not staying too wet for too long. We've got 3 departments now using these probes on a regular basis to inform their irrigation decisions. And then some of our other growers just prefer using like lifting the pots and seeing how much weight they have, and that's also a pretty good method once you get a hang of it and you know your plants in your mix. So I'll take a second now if anyone has any questions, and I can't see whether they're
Yep.
yeah,
I can read them to you, Ryan.
sure.
There are a couple questions here. So the first question is about liners. So Carol wants to know, when you talk about liners, are you talking about liners inside a pot?
Yes, I
Um,
should have specified. Well, I just say liners for any plant material that's smaller and going to be either put into a pot or into the field. But yes, I'm referring to liners for pots.
okay, perfect. And then another question here. I think you alluded to this a bit, but maybe you can expand. Could you talk a bit about how do you train new people on watering different types of containers?
Yeah. Um, Could I talk about it? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh man, watering. It's so subjective and personal. That is one of the trickiest activities to do. I look at it as I want to provide as much information as possible to the grower for them to make good irrigation decisions because they're making the decisions day to day and they know their crop. I mean, I walk in my first, second season, I don't know these crops that well. Um, I know some of the science behind what can benefit the growing of the crops and irrigation decisions, but I don't want to step on toes in a sense that they've been doing it a long time. So I try to be um, respectful of the way that they've made their decisions. Try to as a someone in-house who can spend a lot of time in the crops, also try to walk the crops a lot and see if I can find whether there's patterns of certain crops are getting overwatered, there's root rots, certain crops are wilting, they're not getting watered enough, they're not growing at fast enough rate because of water. So that all takes time, but I think just giving the tools and the resources um, to be able to make good irrigation decisions. And I'm going to get into irrigation a little bit more. Um, but yeah, like offering those moisture probes, some growers really liked it and adopted it. Two new departments adopted using those, and a few others weren't all that interested in them, and that's fine. So then we just encourage good irrigation groupings with getting to know which plants is. Can we do a better job grouping together plants that like the same amount of water is really where we focused more of our effort and improving over the long term or improving the quality of our irrigation system so the irrigation is more evenly distributed.
Awesome. Okay, there's a couple more questions here.
Okay.
If we're using store-bought potting soil, do you recommend testing for pH? Sorry. Do you recommend testing for pH and all before planting seeds? So I think what they're asking is, do you recommend testing store-bought potting soil for pH and nutrients before planting seeds?
I assuming this is more for a smaller scale user, like those packaged mainly peat-based mixes,
They are asking about store-bought, yeah.
store bought. So yeah, like
Hmm.
retails. Um, I would. I mean, personally, what I do is I just buy from a well-respected supplier that I just trust that's going to be appropriate. Um, because there's a lot of cute quality control that goes into that for most suppliers. If it's like a peat based product, I mean, they know that peat is usually a pH between 3.5 and 4, so they know they need to add lime and they know the rates to add. So like I start thousands of flower seedlings and I don't bother, but I just use the same mix every year and I trust them at this point. If but it doesn't hurt. I definitely would. I think there's see we use the pH pen that we use costs I think about $200. So I don't know if that would be justified depending on how many plants um, you're growing. I'm sure there's cheaper options. I just can't speak to their how accurate they are.
Okay, and there's quite a few questions here.
Okay, well, let's go for another maybe 5 minutes, and then I want to make sure there's enough time.
Enough time to talk, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, let me see. Um, I've been I've been used to a peat-based growing mix. Now it seems coir-based mixes are more popular. Plants do not seem to grow well in this. There
Hmm.
is little buffer for watering and root growth.
Hmm. Um, okay, well, we don't grow in coir-based mixes,
Hmm.
and I'm not an expert in this area. We have worked with coir in the past. I've done a little bit of research on it. I know that particle size is very important, and that's for most ingredients. So coir can have all kinds of different particle sizes. So I don't know how coarse it is or how fine it is. And a lot of that will affect the how well it holds and releases water and rootability. I know in the past having salt contaminated coir was an issue, but I don't think that's an issue anymore from what I've heard. Suppliers of coir are leaching the salts from salt water, like out of that. So yeah, I don't know if I can address that one all that well.
Okay, that's fine. There's a question here about mulch.
Yeah.
So would top dressing mulch affect high pH levels?
Affect high pH. Would it bring it down? Maybe is the question. Um,
Maybe, yeah.
yeah, I'm trying to dredge up from my brain. I have seen a presentation addressing that, and from what I recall, they said that no, it has very little impact on lowering the pH significantly. Even if you have a low pH mulch, it's a
Right.
very minor effect because pH is logarithmic. So even if you're dropping the pH a little bit, um, it's yeah, typically not that effective from what I recall.
I think it would really depend on the type of mulch as well. If it were to do anything, it would really depend on the type.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Sorry, I'm just reading this one.
Yeah, no problem.
Uh, Someone saying they're not very familiar with growing media information. How do I make one for my 5 gallon pails? I have a problem with the bottom soil in the pail.
Yes.
Above the airspace is too wet and smells. I can smell it at
Oh,
the end of the season when I
that's not
empty
good. Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not like we don't have that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, yeah. Grow, well, I mean, we work, like I mentioned, we work with Vineland to, we've been yeah, working with them to get those tests done, especially on those physical properties. So we've had a lot of success using some different blends this year, making sure that airspace is rated quite highly. So when I said between 10 and 30%, we asked Vineland to kind of compress our samples a little bit to imitate what we do on the potting line. And most of our mixes came back after compression, kind of they would just press down a bit, coming back with that airspace around 14, 15%, which we thought that's quite good. And then we got it tested at another lab as well, just to compare. And they didn't compress nearly as much, I guess. And they give us airspace around 20, 25%. So I think that having adequate airspace has really helped us because I didn't see that issue in our crops that we grew in those mixes this year. Having that bad smell, having the particles, especially with water movement up and down the profile, I found it was very even. Um, yeah, I would say I don't know what size grower this person is. I think it's worth, if you're a decent sized grower, it's worth investing some like, I mean, talk to your supplier, first of all, like, because they can send samples to Vineland as well. If that's something that you're interested in making sure you got enough airspace, because it sounds like when you have bad smell, that sounds to me like it's just not enough airspace, so it becomes anaerobic. Um, yeah, I guess just reach out to your supplier, see what information they can provide you, um, and emphasizing that air filled air. I can't remember what they called it now, but having enough airspace.
Okay, perfect. And I think this will be the last question for this question break here.
Mhm.
Someone asks, at NVK, do you use the same container mix for the whole season or do you switch it up?
For the whole season. Yes, we use the same mixes throughout the entire season,
Mm-hmm.
but we do have three different mixes that we use. One for large container trees, one for like 1, 2, and 3 gallon trees and shrubs, and then one for perennials. And they're just slightly different, and it's partly based on how our growers irrigate, and it's partly based on yeah, I think it's, and then for the trees, we like to have a bit more material that's kind of chunkier that will maintain um, that won't, because a lot of these trees we have to hold and grow for 2 years. So we'd like some bigger material it'll still break down over time, but it will kind of maintain some of its integrity rather than becoming kind of soppy, kind of fine particled mess. So we have three different mixes. We use the same mixes throughout the entire year.
Right. So it's more you separate the mixes based on species or crop groups rather than time of year.
Yeah, exactly. Crop
Okay.
groups and container
Awesome.
size. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think that's all for this question period. If you want to continue,
Yeah.
Ryan.
Yeah. Let's keep rolling.
Thanks so much for answering those.
No problem. Thanks for the questions, everyone. Um, so the next section, I will start getting into showing pictures of crops and talking about how we manage our crops in containers. But even, sorry, there's a little bit more prep that goes into that beforehand, just because that's my role at the nursery, and that's um, a lot of the emphasis we have is on putting a little bit more work into planning and organizing, and then reaping the rewards throughout the growing season. So part of that is coming up with these master databases for each department where we have all the information you would possibly need to grow a good crop, all in one spreadsheet. So we create these with the growers. They help us come up with the different factors we need to consider. So we start with things like native habitat. Where does the plant grow in nature? It's very helpful to indicate what it might like at the nursery or in the landscape for that matter. Hardiness zone, uh, collecting grower observations. We have like hundreds and hundreds of years collectively of grower experience. Um, Growers that work at MVK tend to stay at MVK, which is great. So I try to capture their knowledge in this column. These are not all complete, these databases. Some of them are still in progress, but it's a good, useful exercise. pH tolerance, drought tolerance. There's not necessarily a ton of good scientific information on flooding tolerance as well. pH, drought, and flooding tolerance are all really important characteristics to understand about the plant you're growing, but it's not that you're going to get some website that's going to tell you there is a website that will tell you this for trees because Vineland helped create it, but for shrubs and perennials and grasses, you don't necessarily have all this information, but you can find at least enough to indicate whether you'd have a problem overwatering a certain crop, or you'd have a problem letting it dry out too much, or you'd have a problem with the pH being too low or too high. So we're just trying to get enough information for us to make use of it. Um, Again, whether excellent drainage is required for certain crops just cannot tolerate anaerobic conditions for even a few hours. They just will suffer from that. Whether shade's required for the plant to do well, or whether kind of prefer shade, and I'll talk about that later. Winter protection. If we can keep certain crops outdoors, just maybe they're wrapped up in frost blanket, that saves us a lot of labor having to move them rather than moving them into polyhouses. Um, and then, of course, major pests and diseases we should be aware of. So having all that information together, in an ideal world, the grower helps you build this database, and that's kind of what happened this year. One of our growers for flowering shrubs, Erica she had some health issues, so she couldn't do the shipping, but she was able to complete this database, which was phenomenal because I started it, but my hope was always that maybe some of the growers would have time or interest in helping me complete this, and she completed it, and it kind of helped her figure out which crops they'd like to organize differently. So a lot of this is the motivation behind this is to figure out what plants do I put in a wet sun house or bed, and by wet I mean like well watered, or a wet shade house, or a dry shade, or a dry sun. Like those are four main categories, and that's getting pretty fancy. But even if we have two or three categories where we can separate out these crops, logistically it's very challenging depending when crops come in to be potted. But that's in an ideal world, we work towards having all the plants grouped together like with like, so that they're getting what they need from irrigation, from sunlight, that kind of stuff. A little bit more planning and organization. Big part of my role, like I mentioned, was prioritizing action on our high loss crops. So being able to go across all our departments every year and manually count crops that we're losing, like one by one. I get a lot of help in the container crops with the crews blocking them up so it's easy to count them. But understanding why we're losing those crops and having the data to be able to figure that out with the growers is really key. So having labels with the potting date, the supplier, the plug or the liner size, and then also the growing media that we used, and all that kind of information is really helpful to give reasons as to why we're losing certain crops and be able to solve that problem. Um, I give a shout out to Cassie Russell and other OMAFA specialists that we lean on to because they're talking to a bunch of other nurseries and their sources of information. They've got some time to do a little bit of research, and they're kind of extension specialists. So being able to spend chunks of the winter meeting with them and with other growers to just maybe focus on some of our challenging crops is really useful. So this is my first plug for the Grower Short Course, um, 2026 that we're holding February 4th. So I'm on the organizing committee, and we still got some space available, although it is filling up pretty quickly, which we're happy with. But this is our opportunity as a sector for all the growers to get together. So these are nursery growers, wholesale growers, but I think we've opened this up to students and other interested parties. This is our opportunity once a year to get all together in one spot and for other growers to give presentations, scientists, specialists to come in and update us on things. So I think that's a big part of how we can spend our off season getting ready for the growing season. I'm still not at the potted plants yet, but I'm getting there, I swear. So monitoring, a big part of my job, um, like I mentioned, is monitoring every crop twice a year, and that's doing. Sometimes it's a quick walkthrough, but sometimes it's slower if I have to examine crops. But I'm walking through, making sure I'm getting my eyes and my nose, if necessary, on on certain crops. The nose part is if it's being overwatered and if it smells bad, like the question we had. We didn't have that problem with our nice air-filled growing media, but it can happen and can cause issues. So having those monitoring records, and we collect those using this software called Zoho. I don't know if it's called a software, but it allows you to store everything um, really easily. You can make forms, and then when you're out just with your phone, you can take a photo, collect it, fill in pre-filled forms on every crop, and then it just stores it for you in a Google Sheet or an Excel or whatever you want to use, and it links the photo to it or photos. So it's really phenomenal. It's really sped up how we can do monitoring and scouting. So I got a photo here too of Lauren doing applying biocontrols, and she's the one actually that found Zoho and started using it gradually, slowly, because we're all like, we're all grower mentality. We don't like change that much, so we slowly adopted it. Some of us, and so she uses it for her scouting records. So Lauren's main focus is on our greenhouse production, but also she'll prioritize like susceptible species out there in the landscape. Sorry, not in our on our farms or on our container farms. If she knows, especially for invasive pests, she's out there scouting regularly for that kind of stuff. And then shout out to Ontario Nursery Crops blog that Cassie runs. It's a great way of staying up to date with especially invasive pests or diseases or really anything that's going on in our sector. She does a great job with that. So, okay, I'm moving on to growing practices. Um, okay, so when we're potting, we're fertilizing on the line. We use control release fertilizer. We've used roughly the same blend for I think a couple decades now. I think it's pretty much the standard across the industry to use control release fertilizer just because, it's being released as based on temperature and availability of moisture to move those nutrients within those prills into the growing media. And we like it because I mean, we do have a one size fits all kind of approach, but we don't see deficiencies. So that photo I have of those pines, um, that's not due to our CRF not providing enough nutrients. That's due to the fact that they've probably been in those pots too long, or they've fallen over too many times and spilled the fertilizer out, um, or the roots have just filled in so much that it's really hard for the growing. That's kind of a separate issue. Um, we had an extension specialist from the States, from Ohio, come up couple years ago and kind of summarize the research that's been done on control release placement in the pot. And one thing that stuck out to me was him saying that one of the best methods for getting good use of your control release fertilizer is to top dress and then put a layer of mulch on top of that. Um, Moderates the temperature a bit, but it's also still at the top of the pot. So as conditions warm up, it releases through the entire profile of the growing media, rather than blending it where you get prills throughout the entire potting mix. But you might have some of those prills releasing nutrients before roots have really gotten a chance to establish through the whole profile. So I was happy to hear we were doing that right in his professional opinion. Um, Nutrients, something interesting I learned a couple of years ago was that most plants need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in a 3-1-2 ratio. And then, of course, micronutrients, they need those. And I'm not going to go into all the ratios that they need those into, also because I don't know. But I know with NPK, it's roughly 3-1-2 for most plants. And then if you start looking at the formulations of most control release, you will see that it's roughly a 3-1-2 ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, which was kind of interesting. So we don't see, even though we do have a one size fits all kind of approach right now, it's serving us pretty well. We don't see deficiencies because of a lack of fertilizer or not the right mix of nutrients. And just remember, your potting mix is pretty much meant to not make much nutrients available. It's meant to be a substrate for roots to grow in, but not necessarily supply all that many nutrients. So most of your nutrients are going to come from fertilization. And then looking at the release schedule, this is something that we can improve upon. We've talked about it the last couple of years, and I think we need to execute it this year. And I think Nolan's working on it, is release schedule, making sure that there's a the release schedule of your fertilizer. So if it's a 3 to 4 month CRF, or if it's a 5 to 6 month, or whatever mix you're using, knowing that it's going to keep releasing late into the summer and the fall, and then you're going to be vulnerable, having tender growth with frosts in the fall, killing back that tender growth, and not having it quite as winter hardy as you'd like. So that's something I saw last fall, and I think something that we can improve upon, um, and I'd be interested to hear what other people do with that. Okay, here's definitely an important topic, irrigation. I just tried to highlight some of the key considerations. Something that we do is test water quality regularly from our different ponds. We have some farms that have wells as well. And really what I'm showing you here are some recommended standards from a couple different sources. These can seem maybe pretty ambitious for some of our water sources where we have pH sometimes well above 8. We don't have to tend to have low pH water around in our parts, but EC for water quality, should be nice and low, but often our EC is decent amount higher than that, which can pose some challenges. Figuring out what's causing that EC to be higher would require more testing. And then alkalinity is it's a concept that I didn't understand until recently. And it's really important to understand alkalinity is what affects the pH in your growing media over the season. Um, it's one of the main factors that affects it. Fertilizer can also affect pH, but alkalinity can really affect pH if it's high. If it's above that 120 ppm into the 2, 3, 400 ppm, which we have in some of our ponds, then you're literally liming your potting soil every single time you irrigate with quite a bit of calcium carbonate, and you're going to raise the pH. On the other hand, in other parts of North America, for instance, in Alabama, because I watched a webinar recently, they have the opposite problem where they have very low alkalinity in their water. And then in combination with the acidifying effect of some of their fertilizers that they use, they can have the problem where their pH is dropping throughout the season, which is stressful, which they need to address with lime. So that's kind of the Cole's notes on that. Sanitization can be helpful to think about. There's filter options. I don't know that we've got the best solution to that, but we do have a solution for our outdoor pumps. We do have filters installed, but they don't have an auto flush, which is rather expensive function. So our growers do have to clean out the filters quite regularly, but it does prevent weed seed from passing through and other material that can clog our lines, that can spread weeds. Chemicals, there are chemicals available that can help keep the lines clean. I think the value in that also is keeping your nozzles and your lines clean so that you get as even distribution of your irrigation as possible. And then the last concept, I'll kind of talk about another one that I've learned a little bit more about recently, and it's good to be aware of as if you're a grower, if you especially if you're an irrigator, um, leaching fraction. Um, so leaching fraction is just the leachate volume that you get coming out of the bottom of a pot after you irrigate, as divided by the total applied irrigation volume. So you're applying irrigation, you're getting some of that water's coming out of the bottom of the pots, but most of it's staying inside the pot and it's replenishing um, uh, a dry root ball. So you want it to be between 15 and 20%. So that indication, and it'll make sense as I move to the next slide. But you want to leach a little bit because no irrigation or very few irrigation systems are perfectly even or accurate. So you're going to have to overwater a little bit on some pots to be able to get all of them wet enough, especially in the summer as plants dry out. It's also useful to leach out sometimes some extra nutrients if things have built up a bit. Um, Distribution uniformity is a key concept. So Nolan, our water management specialist, did some testing. I'll show you in a second his results. But for overhead sprinkler systems, which I'm sure a lot of us use, some of them, better than others, we're looking for a distribution uniformity of zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.8. So a distribution uniformity of 1.0 would be perfect distribution. Every single pot's getting the same amount of water. So if you're getting a distribution uniformity, the higher it is, closer to 1, the better. So he's done some testing. Ours is not where we want it to be on every farm. But we did, for instance, on the right-hand side, you can see that boom um, moving over those containers. And in our new greenhouse, we did install a boom that has almost perfect distribution uniformity, which is great for young plants. It means you're able to really water them all, not only with the right dynamics, letting them, watering them, letting them dry down a little bit, watering them again, but you're almost positive that every single plug is getting the same amount of water, which is fantastic. Outdoors, it's a little different. So this kind of like a heat map. It's like a water distribution map. Each value represents how much water was collected in a little cup that Nolan set up around one of our cold frames and where we grow our container plants. So you can see the darker the green, the more water was collected in that cup. And the lighter the green or the whiter it is, the less water. So you can see that this particular zone was, I don't know what the distribution uniformity value was for it, but you can clearly see that it wasn't 1.0, it probably wasn't 0.8. I think he said, yeah, I won't quote Nolan because I can't remember what he said. It's we're not terrible, but we could definitely improve. Alternative containers for watering and temperature. Just a couple of notes. We've done trials on some air pruning pots on the left-hand side there, and some fabric pots, as well as the standard control. And as you'd imagine, the root balls dry out faster in the air pruning pots. There's more exposure for evaporation and basically just for the root systems to dry out quicker. So that's something to be aware of if you want to use air pruning pots. We are using them for a lot of tree production now, but we use a holder that buffers all that dry out and also buffers the temperature extremes. So that's the other thing. The fabric bag was an interesting one. That still did dry out a little bit faster than a standard pot, but it buffered the temperature extremes quite nicely. So that could be quite important for certain crops and make them quite a bit happier. I think this is my last slide before another quick, because I know I don't have too much time left, but another quick question period. In terms of weed management, the coarser the bark, the better. This mulch is not exactly as coarse as we'd like, but anything that prevents weeds from being able to germinate and grow on the surface. This is a great example of maybe what you want to avoid. We had some machinery down last spring and we didn't get our pre-emergent herbicide applied to this gravel bed. So we had weed issues so it wasn't, our normal plan would be pre-emergent herbicide and then spot sprays to keep the weeds down, so we keep the weed sources down. If we are relying a lot on hand weeding, we don't do a lot of um, herbicide use within the containers, except for we have trialed and pre-emergent herbicide on some of our evergreens, and it's been very effective. But we do, for the vast majority, rely on hand weeding and staying on top of that, being preventative, making sure we're pulling out weeds regularly rather than waiting till they become a problem. Um, and then lastly, a cool little solution Nolan found was a something called the foam stream, which is just it's like a chemical-free way of managing weeds. It uses like a potato, I think it's potato starch, it's vegetable starch to create a foam, and it's a hot foam that you can apply to the base of a long-term crop, for instance, that gets a lot of weeds in it eventually, and it will not only kill the roots of the weeds, but also kill the weed seed. So it's like a sanitization effect too. It's been very effective. Nolan tells me it replaces an 8-person weeding crew with one person using this device. Uh, that's based on his speed, and he's pretty quick, so I don't know. But it definitely replaces a lot of labor. And then the nice thing is you've got that sanitization effect. So you're not only replacing labor, but you're also doing a more effective job of killing the weeds, and they stay clean for longer. So that's really cool. I've got another quick question period, but I wonder if maybe we should save it for the end.
We can save it for the end if you want, sure. There
Great.
are a few questions here, but if you're almost through, maybe we'll just keep going and save
Got
them.
a few more slides,
Okay.
and yeah, I'm not sure how hard the 215 stop is.
We can go a little bit past.
Yeah.
But if you maybe, yeah, maybe finish and then we'll collect the
Yeah,
questions
let's
for
do
the
that.
end.
Yep,
Okay,
sounds good.
awesome. Okay.
Okay. Just a few more slides, just kind of trying to be comprehensive. All the things that we consider in container growing. So shade management is very important, especially for like, you know, species that really require shade. The next step for us is determining which plant species don't necessarily require shade but benefit from shade. So trying to up our game in that sense of providing maybe it's just afternoon shade or providing some form of shade that allows us to produce higher quality plants, not just the really shade intolerant plants. Spacing, I think we can all appreciate the importance of spacing. It is a lot of labor. We've kind of committed for our flowering shrubs in particular to just making sure we get that labor in the spring to get them all spaced on time. It's a big farm, for instance, and it's just a lot of work to get everything respaced in the spring. But it does provide a better conditions for obviously for airflow, to prevent disease, especially fungal bacterial diseases that like that moist environment where all the leaves are tight against each other. But then it also just allows each plant to get the maximum amount of sunlight, and that's kind of what we're after. That's what fuels the growth of the plants. So that's all I'll say about spacing. Blowover prevention is a big topic. It's actually come to the near the top of one of our priorities as a nursery sector in discussions with other growers is that it's just a labor killer when plants blow over like this. I mean that's an extreme example on the right. It's that I grabbed this photo from the company that manufactures those stands. But we do use those stands. Those are called top hats. And I think the recommendation from other growers I've heard is to use at least 2 or 3 more dense rows of propped up plants, especially where the prevailing wind is, so to protect the other plants from blowing over. I think that's more the idea. Um, but it has plant health implications too when there's a lot of blowover. We lose fertilizer out of the pots. We do use a sticky fertilizer to top dress to help prevent some of that loss. But it's kind of inevitable if you have plants blowing over. They also then sit on the hot weed mat, which is not great. It can burn foliage. And then they also miss out, if they're not stood up in time, they can miss out on irrigation events as well. So that's obviously not ideal either. We use these stands on the left-hand side. You can see our native 1 and 2 gallon department uses a lot of these stands. They just know which crops need them at a certain point. Um, it's extra cost and maybe a little bit more labor sticking them in the stands, but for them, it's definitely worth it. Pruning, I won't say too much on pruning other than to say Lauren's been great about getting our growers a little bit more educated and about sanitation. And not only that, but also providing a solution. So she's always handing out these spray bottles uh, of 99% isopropyl alcohol to make sure we're spraying our pruners, um, especially when we're dealing with crops that are susceptible to diseases that can be spread through pruning cuts. There's a lot more I could say on pruning, but I'll keep moving. Overwintering, I've got some cool data to show you in a second, but I mean, a lot of us use poly houses to overwinter our crops, especially to keep them from drying out over the winter. Humidity is really high in there. But then late winter, early spring, we start thinking about, well, either venting them, cutting holes, or just removing the plastic. Because if we don't, all this graph is showing you is indoor temperature inside a poly house versus outdoor temperature just outside, just out, near the poly house. And it shows you how much higher the temperature can go in, and this is in late February, I believe, or into March, 2023. It shows you how much higher the temperature can spike inside the poly house, especially on sunny days. And that could start waking up the plants a little earlier and make them susceptible to, early spring frosts and that kind of thing. So that's some cool data that we've collected. Um, but just yeah, this is a whole big topic, and my preference for hardy plants is keep them outdoors, make sure they don't keep them insulated if you need to, and then have a way to get water on them if for some reason they dried out. But you can't do that for all the crops we grow. Some of them do need the protection. Lastly, the effective time is an interesting one on potted plants. They're not meant to live in those pots forever. And once they start getting too pot bound, you get all kinds of problems. So I got a cedar here that is quite pot bound at this point. And you can see most of the active root growth is happening at the bottom of the pot because the roots are kind of directed down there, and that's where the moisture kind of collects. It's an issue with blowover. I'll show you there. The keeping potted plants around too long is just a bit of a nightmare because the growing media also its physical properties change. So it doesn't hold water as well. It doesn't hold nutrients necessarily as well. So we need a plan. So part of what we've done at the nursery and our president's been working on this for quite a while, and we've launched our own internal software system for inventory management. And we've also created a position for one of our most organized employees to be able to help coordinate when action should be taken, especially potting up to make sure plants aren't staying in the same pot too long, or if they're destined to go from a 2 to a 7, they're going to get potted at the right time, or whether it's time, sadly, to throw out certain crops that just aren't going to be healthy anymore growing in that size pot, and there's no market to pot them up or plant them out. My last slide, and I save the best for last because without good people working in the nursery, you really can't accomplish much. It takes a lot of passionate, curious, observant people uh, caring about their crops to grow a good container crop or a field crop or whatever kind of crop. Like without those people, it would be a nightmare trying to do it. If our growers didn't care about their crops, I mean, it would be such an uphill battle. But they do. All of them do, and they've been doing it a long time. So it's a pleasure to work with them, try to support them, recognizing they know a lot of things I might not know about their crops. Something that we like to do is send some of our growers to the International Plant Propagator Society um, conferences every year. So there's a group that we sent down to Kentucky, and there's one in Michigan this year. Sometimes they come to Ontario. Yeah, so just I'll kind of end it on that note. I'll give one last plug for the grocery, the growers short course. Um, if anyone wants to register, you just Google that and you'll find it for 2026. And you got a few minutes for questions. Thank you very much. And my contact information is there if anyone would like to get in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was a
No
great
problem.
presentation.
Hopefully I didn't go too
Lots,
long.
no, lots packed in there. It was awesome. So we do have time for a couple questions here, so I'll just pick a few out. So this is a question about pre-emergent. Are you
Hmm.
using pre-emergent before adding coarse bark?
Oh, that's a good question. If that person wants to email me, put
Sure.
them in touch with with Nolan. We don't
Okay.
regularly use pre-emergent. He's more trialed it out. It's not like a regular practice. So I can um, set that person up with Nolan to answer that question.
Okay, perfect. And your contact information is here on the slide. So,
Yep.
and if anybody wants to contact Ryan after the webinar as well, it's just up there. So,
Yep.
okay, one more question. Do you reuse pots and trays? If so, how thorough are you in terms of cleaning and sanitizing between crop cycles? What is your process?
Yeah, we do you reuse pots and trays. The trays we have a good process because we have a tray cleaner with I can't remember the chemical, but it's sanitization chemical that we mix in, and so we push it through, push each tray through the cleaner, and it gets sanitized and cleaned. With pots, we don't have a system, but we do reuse them. So that is something I've wondered about, and I don't have a good answer to that. So we do reuse pots where we can, and so there's the potential for transmitting um, certain pathogens. I mean, like if a crop is unhealthy, we'll throw it out. So at least, yeah, but actually, come to think of it, I'm not sure what we do with those pots. So it's a very good question. Actually, something I'll make a note of.
Awesome. Okay, and one quick one here that just came in. Where can I find more information on the foam product? I'm interested in this too. That you keep that you use to keep weeds in control. I've never
Yeah.
seen that before.
Yeah, it's a really unique solution. And it's
Yeah.
like Nolan's crunched all the numbers, so it does work. Um, it works when he runs it. And so we're trying to find someone else like he's very fast. Um, I think it will work even if someone's a bit slower. So I'd say if this person wants to just reach out, it's called Foam Stream, but if this person wants to just email me, and then
Okay.
I'll put them in touch with Nolan and he can take it from there.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much, Ryan. Really great talk. Information
Thank you.
was great for nursery growers as well as floriculture growers. So really enjoyed having you on today and can't thank you enough. So
I
thank you.
appreciate the invite. Yeah, appreciate the
Okay.
opportunity.
Awesome. And thank you everybody for joining us. Have a good day. Okay. Bye-bye.